I guess I've always been drawn to forest birding, and that can be either dry sclerophyll or wet.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, I might sort of go up to Talangi area amongst the mountain ash forests where you've got all those wonderful forest birds. I really love doing that. I also like the more open dry forests as well, and especially for nocturnal birding. So going out spotlighting
Oh, yeah.
and looking for owls and nightjars and marsupials and that sort of thing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig. Our guest today is a semi-retired professional photographer and musician with more than 30 years' experience working at the University of Melbourne. He took a position in the university's central photographic unit early in the 1980s, which eventually led to him becoming the manager of the unit in early 1990s up until 2004. Since then, he has also performed as a guitarist in numerous Melbourne bands. Our guest's interest in photographing native birds began in the early 2000s after a couple of trips to Central Australia. Since leaving the university in 2014, he has pursued his passion for bird photography and birding in a more general sense. And with the introduction of online resources like eBird and Facebook, a whole new world of birding has opened up for him. So without further ado, please welcome David Adam. How are you doing, David?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yep. And I'm really excited to have you on the show, so thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So, David Adam, what brings you joy in birding?
Well, I guess these days would be exploring new locations, seeing new birds, of course. It's always great to see birds for the first time, but it's also good to find rarer birds within locations that you're used to birding in, like local LGAs, for example. So that, and probably just being out amongst it in the bush. I love being out in the bush. So that's probably one of my favourite things to do. Yes. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I was already a photographer and worked in a central photographic area at the University of Melbourne. So we photographed everything from studio type photography to going out on location. And so already having that experience as a photographer causes you to look at things slightly differently. So you might look at the world as though you were looking at it through a lens. And because of my interest in the outdoors, the great outdoors and nature, and going to Central Australia and locations like that, it was really, I guess, a natural thing to get interested in photographing birds, especially probably seeing things like my first flame robin back in the late 1990s up at Sugarloaf Dam, and seeing this bright orange bird sitting on the ground, flying around, looking for things to eat, insects and the like. Seeing that bright splash of colour really attracted me to wanting to photograph them. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm interested in what sort of work you did in photography at the university. What kind of?
All right. Yeah. So I originally joined the university as a darkroom technician, which meant I went to work every day and went into a darkroom, and I basically processed photographs in trays with solutions. And so I did that for quite a number of years. So that included basically the processing of the prints, and then doing things like retouching them and getting them ready for the clients. So that was what I first started doing. Of course, that over time evolved, and I saw the evolution, I guess, into the digital area. arena. So everything changed then. We were able to do away with all the old technologies and change our cameras and our ways to capture, etc. So, but yeah, the type of work, it really varied. It could be a subject-specific type of photography, which could involve going into any faculty. For example, the engineering faculty might be doing some work on perhaps earthquake engineering, and they might have setups that needed to be photographed. Or it might be zoology department who had research going on relating to maybe animals and that sort of thing. So whole range of things, really. Architecture, you name a subject, I probably went and photographed it somewhere around the university.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's because it's not often that, well, in my experience, that you meet a professional photographer who's kind of done that as, for decades. That's fascinating. And so, just to shift back and to loop back onto the birding, I'm interested in what are some of your craziest birding experiences and where they were. What happened in your birding life that you really cherish?
Right. Well, I was thinking about that because you did send me a few suggestions to think about. So there was a trip that I did in 2018 with Bernie O'Keefe out to Jupiter Well to see if we could find a rare parrot called the princess parrot. And I might be able to talk about that in more detail a bit later. But on the return journey from that trip, I was driving with one of my fellow birders in his Toyota Prado, which actually broke a bumper bar. And so we ended up driving in one day the full 800 kilometres from Jupiter Well all the way back to Alice Springs, where I think we arrived at 2 a.m. in the morning and checked ourselves into the Plaza Hotel. I think we only got 4 hours sleep before having to get up the next morning and go looking for someone to weld the bumper bar back on. So it was a pretty sort of crazy thing to do because in hindsight, we probably shouldn't have driven the car anywhere, because the bumper bars, when they snap like that, they can go underneath the car and cause the vehicle to flip over. So but anyway, that was probably a crazy thing to do. There might have been one or two other things, like going after work on a Friday night, driving up to Goshen, getting up there at midnight and then going spotlighting for a couple of hours for things like little button quail. So, yeah, there've been one or two things that have been a bit crazy, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's part of what we're talking about, the joy of birding, all these crazy experiences that are also, you remember them so well.
That's right.
These little moments, and so if we take into account all of that, but if we can focus more on kind of local birding, especially given COVID and the past 18 months, where have you been going birding? Because are you in Melbourne at the moment?
Yeah, so I live in Eltham.
Okay, yeah.
It's just northeast of Melbourne by about 25 kilometres. My local LGA is the Shire of Nillumbik, which is adjacent also to the LGAs of Manningham, Whittlesea, and Banyule. So,
Banyule, yeah.
So some of the birding locations that I've been frequenting during this lockdown for the last 18 months would be, locally in Eltham at Laughing Waters, which is right on the Yarra River, a really great birding spot. I've been going out to Banyule Flats a bit, although only when that's slightly out of the 5K range, but I've been going there, and I have been going there for years actually, so I know that area quite well.
Yeah.
During the last 18 months, I've really got to explore a place called the Plenty Gorge, which is a gorge that runs from around about probably Greensborough all the way up to Mernda. It meanders probably about 10 to 15 k's, I guess, along a winding river. And that's really opened up a whole lot of new locations for birding for me in the last 18 months. Areas so close to home that I didn't know existed, and the diversity of birds in there as well. So it's been great fun actually doing that. But on the same score, or on the other side of the coin, I'm definitely looking forward to getting out of lockdown and travelling further afield again for birding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and aren't we all, for sure? I mean, and at the time of recording, this is the last day of lockdown, isn't it? The 21st. So
it is.
So yes. Have you got any like what's the first thing you'll do when you're free to get? Well, I mean, I think we can't go to regional Victoria yet, can we?
No, not until we reach the 80% double dose vaccination. But when we do reach that point, I have a trip planned with a few friends. We'll probably head down to East Gippsland and do some birding around that area.
Yep.
Taking in some well-known locations like Malakuta and the like. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Is that speaking about specific places and locations? Do you have a specific habitat type that you particularly enjoy birding in, like a forest or wetland? What sort of habitat do you like birding in?
I guess I've always been drawn to forest birding, and that can be either dry sclerophyll or wet.
Yeah.
So, for example, I might sort of go up to Talangi area amongst the mountain ash forests where you've got all those wonderful forest birds. I really love doing that. I also like the more open dry forests as well, and especially for nocturnal birding. So going out spotlighting.
Oh yeah.
And looking for owls and nightjars and marsupials and that sort of thing. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to actually redoing. Since we've been locked down and in a curfew, we haven't really been able to do that. So really looking forward to doing that again. Yeah,
for sure. And I'd just like to briefly mention, I'm the same. I love forest birding. I think it's really there's something special about it. Which I can't quite put my finger on, but I've always preferred birding in more closed habitats.
Yes, exactly.
Just because, maybe it's just because the birds, you can't see very far in habitats like that. So when you do find a bird, I mean, there's so much potential in what you could see. But of course, that's true with a lot of different habitats, and one could argue with all habitats it's like that. But there's just that sense of surprise that you can get in a forest, because
yes, there is.
Yeah.
You can also learn the sounds or the calls that the birds make, and the more you get into those environments, the more you can train your ear to learn the sounds of those birds and how they behave. And so often in the forest birds have certain activities or behaviours that the more you go in there, the more you get to learn about them, and that includes the way they call to one another. So I find that environment more exciting and challenging as well. For that reason, I think, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking about the challenges of environments like that, especially as a photographer, do you mostly go out to go birding with photography in mind, or do you have the camera as a backup if you see something especially rare? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so it's kind of like wearing two different hats in a way, because I think as a birder, you're not so kind of concerned about the photography. You're probably more concerned about the overall experience, and so being a photographer as well, yes, I do take a pair of binoculars with me, and I have my camera usually hanging on one side ready to go. And in fact, for the last 18 months, that's the way I've been going out into those environments. Whereas someone who's just wearing the hat for photographing birds might go out into environment and set themselves up and wait for that special moment to occur. So I've been doing less of that, although one side of me would like to be doing more of that sort of thing. But I think that the lockdowns forced me into a more kind of general approach to birding. So
yeah, for sure.
I am hoping to get back out and do more kind of setups where I go and get that slightly better shot than last time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I see what you mean. Always trying to improve. That's definitely, and like honing your skills in a way that improves the hobby kind of thing. But yeah. And so, do you have? I wanted also to ask. I asked about the crazy experiences before, but is there a specific photographic experience of a bird that you really cherish, or is it all kind of the same?
Yeah, look, there've been some good photographic experiences for me over the years. One really good one, and where I was able to capture what I thought was a really fantastic photograph was down at the Nobbies on Phillip Island. And I was with a friend of mine who's also a bird photographer. But I was focusing on a Nankeen kestrel, which was just sitting on a wooden handrail. And I was just looking at it through a long lens. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, another one came down and attacked it. And I sort of got them just at the moment when they were both kind of opposite one another in sort of mid-flight. And yeah, that was a really great experience.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
From a photographic point of view. I guess photographing a pink robin once up at Talangi when it just came out and sat up perfectly for me and enabled me to get that shot, So yeah, I'm always looking for those sorts of opportunities when I'm going out photography.
Yeah,
sure.
Beautiful. That's so great. There's nothing like the feeling you get when you just manage to get that footage. It's just really great. And so let me flip the question a little bit sideways. What would be the bird? How can I put this? The most difficult bird you've ever photographed that you've had to work the hardest to get a photo of? Does anyone come to mind? Any one bird?
Well, when we did the trip up to Jupiter Well with Bernie O'Keefe on the Princess Parrot trip, that took us 3 days to actually get to see it. And in fact, what happened was we were up there in a convoy of 4 vehicles, and we would get up every morning before dawn, and we would drive along a section of road out from the camp. We'd drive probably maybe 15 or 20 Ks in either direction. And on the first morning, we went out and we knew that the bird was a difficult bird to find and that our chances were, not that great, really. So anyway, on the first morning, we drove out, and of course, you can imagine if you're driving with 4 vehicles in convoy on those sandy roads out in the desert, you get these plumes of dust. So our car was the 4th car, and anyway, the first and second car had stopped, and they saw several parrots fly over, and by the time we got there, they'd flown over. And so we all got out of the cars and went walking sort of through the scrub and sand dunes, but we had no luck at refinding the birds. And so this happened for a couple of days, and on the 3rd, I think, and final day that we were there, it was agreed that we would let our car take the lead, and which we did. And so, as usual, we left in the morning before dawn and drove about 5 or 6 Ks out from camp. And I looked out the side window and saw this dead tree up on the sand dune, and it looked like there were 6 birds up there. And so we stopped the car, and a closer look, it turned out to be the parrots, the princess parrots. So that was a hard-earned search for an elusive bird, and we were very well rewarded because we were able to climb up onto that sand dune and find them feeding on the other side, just only meters away. So that was a fantastic experience. Probably one of the best, I guess.
Yeah, it must have been so amazing. And I was talking to Bernie just yesterday because we were recording his episode. Okay. And it's just so amazing. And that comes back to the joy of just getting out in these amazing habitats. It must have been an experience for sure. Wow.
Yes, well, that trip, I was invited along at the last minute, actually, and I was really overwhelmed to be asked on that trip, and it was fantastic, yeah. And I think Jupiter Well, I'm not sure whether you know, but it's about 800 kilometres to the west of Alice Springs. So it's probably one of the most remote locations in Australia to get to. That was certainly an adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. It really must have been. I hope to maybe go there one day, because I first read about that place in Rowan Clarke and Tim Dolby's book, Finding Australian Birds. They've got a section. Yes. They've got a section on Jupiter Well there, and it just seems so brilliant. Oh goodness.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I highly recommend it. But if you ever go, make sure you go with other people and you've got more than one vehicle, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, out there, safety is such a huge priority, when you're out in those places. And I have heard crazy stories of people dying in the outback because they didn't prepare.
Yes, well, that could easily happen out there. So you certainly want to be well prepared and to take a satellite phone with you and that sort of thing, just in case things do go wrong.
Yeah. So coming back to civilization, so to speak, do you, when you're out birding locally and also, in different parts of the state or the country, do you list? Are you a lister?
I am a lister. I use eBird.
Yeah.
I've been using eBird since about 2015, I think. It's one of the most useful birding tools that's out there, in terms of not only creating your life lists of birds, so automatically having a life list, a working list that you can refer to, having year lists, having local lists for your local patch, or LGA lists, which is really the big thing these days. A lot of young birders are really keen on their LGA lists, and you've probably heard some of the terms around like mayor and deputy mayor and that sort of thing. So if you look at a number of the LGAs, you'll see that some of the mayors of those LGAs are well-known birders, and they've been using eBird as long, if not longer.
Yeah. Are you the mayor of your LGA?
Unfortunately, not. And the reason for that is I'm actually third in my LGA of the Shire of Nillumbik. Unfortunately for me, or fortunately, the mayor of Nillumbik is actually Rowan Clarke. So Rowan Clarke of the Australian Bird Guide, and he's been birding that LGA pretty hard for a few years. And in fact, it was during 2020 lockdown that he reached the magic number of 200 for the LGA. So there's another couple that are also not far off that, and then I'm number 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love the competitive spirit. You know, I'm a little bit like that, and my dad certainly is. He does it with hotspots as well. So he's keen to get onto the list of Banyule flats,
Right.
which is amazing. I must say, the top 10 list, you know, the top 10 e-birders of Banyule flats. Wow, that's like over 100 species. I think like it's starting to get hard. You know, it gets progressively
Yes,
harder when when you get closer to the top. And
that's right. The thin end of the wedge. Yes, for sure. Um, yeah, I think the mayor of Banyule Flats is probably someone like Owen Lishmond. I think, isn't it? I'm not
oh,
sure, but
I wouldn't be able to tell you at this point,
yeah,
but yeah, but there's lots of things to kind of do if you have a competitive spirit. And I don't think, you know, often competition and competitive spirits are frowned upon in the birding community, but you know, if it's regulated and kind of friendly, I think it's a great thing. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's right. And um, from my experience, it is a very friendly activity, and a lot of laughs are had along the way as well, too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I wanted also to shift to a slightly different topic, which is one that I am also interested in, which is music. So,
Yep.
I'm also a musician. I'm a guitarist and I play piano as well. And
Okay.
and so and it's my other big passion. Let's
Right.
say after I have
Okay.
birding and music. You know, I love playing music
Yeah.
and guitar, and I
Yep.
think I'm really interested to talk about this with you, David, because
Yeah.
for me personally, as a musician and as a birder, the feelings of joy are actually quite similar that I get
Yep.
from
Yep.
playing guitar and performing and recording also and composing. That in some sense and for some reason I can't quite comprehend, the joy is there in both passions, and and the joy is quite similar. Would you agree with that? Is there an overlap in the two passions?
Yes, I do agree with that. Um, there's a certain euphoric experience that a musician can have, for example, when they're on stage performing with other musicians, and the audience exchange, which really is a feeling that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. Although when you're in the audience watching your favourite band, then you are experiencing that exchange, that energy exchange, and I think the same for birding too. And um, having an ear for music is also really good. As I was saying before, you're out in the bush and your hearing or your listening's tuned into the various sounds and cadences that are around you. So it's a really good training environment actually for your ear when you're out in the bush. So there are some overlaps there, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting to discuss that because I actually don't know that many birders slash musicians.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting when you meet people who have the same, not only the same one passion as you, but also share another one in common.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's really interesting to talk about that. And so just kind of briefly, how long have you been? I know that you've been playing music for a long time. But has that fluctuated a little bit? Like, what I mean is when you started to get interested in birds, did that kind of take off as the music dwindled, or not at all?
Not at all, actually. I've worked as a professional musician on and off for, at least the last 30 years, and with sometimes lots of work and other times maybe not so much work. But taking up an interest in birding didn't really have any bearing on how much music I was playing or not playing, really. Of course, COVID lockdown has changed the music performance side of things.
Yeah,
So then it becomes a thing about self-discipline, and it's a more kind of, I guess, introspective activity in terms of keeping yourself motivated to learn new music and to record and do those sorts of things. So, I've kept the both going really non-stop all the time. And in fact, last year, one of the bands that I'm in, we tried using an online tool to enable us to have virtual rehearsals with some limited success. But, that was quite good.
Yeah, that would be tricky, wouldn't it? Yeah. And so just to finish up on that music/birding segment, I also think that we're lucky because it also gives some balance in life as well. Because I do think when you have one sole passion and one sole hobby, that it can become a bit, and maybe people would probably disagree with this, but it can become a bit overly obsessive, depending on personality, of course, and different things like that. But I think I consider myself lucky in any case that I can kind of switch between birding and music, because it kind of gives it's two different worlds. You can jump into birding in the morning and go out on a walk, or a weekend's camping, and then and then you can completely shift your environment and go into the music world. And I think that's a real privilege. And I'm sure that if there are birder musicians listening, that they'll understand that. And I'm sure you understand that as well. Like it's really interesting to kind of...
Yeah, I agree with that totally, yes.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to have varied activities to give your life more interest, don't you? And sometimes just by going out the front door and closing it behind you and getting out into the bush can enable you to recharge, so to speak. So
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting, and one of the reasons I was keen to talk to you about the music, and I also know that you have a website, osbirds.net.
Oh yes, yep.
So how? Tell me a little bit about that, because I think it's a great way. Of course, the internet is a great way to kind of engage in the conversation about birding and the passion and the networking as well. So how long have you had that website up, and why did you start it?
I guess when I retired from Melbourne University, I was very much involved in online learning and teaching in educational design. And so part of that was website delivery of learning materials. So it was sort of one of those natural things to do, I guess, was to actually build a website, a WordPress type website, one that I could upload photographs to, and one that I could write blogs on, and one that I might be able to sell my work on as well, which I don't sell much of it really, but that was the idea. And so that's what I've set up there. So if you look at the website, it's divided into an active blog, so which basically covers some of the trips that I've done, and then a portfolio of some of the images, a database on there of a number of birds as well, which needs work, I must say, still. And then some of the things that I've had available for sale in various shops around Melbourne and nurseries, like cards and calendars and that sort of thing. So, I've used it in that way as well. But it doesn't really draw much income. So I'm just sort of maintaining it and mostly using it to write my blogs when I do a significant trip, for example. Mm-hmm. So early this year we did a trip up to Iron Range in far north Queensland. So that's the latest blog about that trip.
Yeah. I've had a look at the website, and it's really nice to have to kind of have your own internet space, I suppose. And I wanted also to briefly touch on how you go about selling your work and earning income from bird photography, because I think it's really inspiring, and especially if there's kind of beginner bird photographers listening or watching or beginner birders. So how do you go about that? And do you have tips about how to progress to that stage to where you can sell your work?
Yeah, so it was really, for me, sort of trial and error, I guess. Initially, I approached the Eltham bookshop, my local bookshop, and they were very supportive. And so I created a run of cards. So I chose a selection of images. This is going back probably at least 5 or 6 years now. And then I went through the process of sourcing all the materials that I needed, where to send the cards out to be manufactured, where to get things like envelopes and cellophane packaging and all of that. And so I went and did all that as an exercise. And then I went and made approaches to different locations. So it can be a little bit hit and miss, but it's quite a nice feeling when you make approaches to other types of entities that are willing to take you on and stock your photographs. So I would go to places like readings in Carlton, or my local bookshop, or nurseries, and so I did that to a certain extent, and enough so that it could just sort of keep itself going along.
And
so it's not a huge thing, but it's an enjoyable thing, and it's a way to keep engaged with those types of organisations as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I like a kind of desert island question just popped into my head here, and as we're talking about photography and the passion, if you could only have your camera or your binoculars, which one would you choose?
Ooh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Well, if you were trapped on a desert island, then let's assume that you don't have the internet or the World Wide Web or anything like that, then probably a pair of binoculars would be the way to go, I would think. So I think that would be my answer. Yeah.
What about if we weren't on the desert island? What if you had to sacrifice either the camera or the binoculars?
One or the other.
Yeah.
Well, I'd probably go back to the camera then.
Yeah. I mean, I also instinctively say binoculars.
Yeah.
Just because, well, it's instinctive. I don't really know why, but I just the feeling that you get when you lift your binoculars and you see a gorgeous bird, that's pretty hard to beat. But also, and it does vary from person to person. But I think it's an interesting question. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in the same vein, do you have a favorite bird?
A favourite bird? Let's put it this way. I've got some favourite birds that I haven't seen yet. So on my needs list, if you like. So if we go back to eBird and talk about target species, which everyone can look up on their own eBird account and see where they need to work on to find new birds. Well, one of the birds that I've managed to dip on over the years is leather-winged kite. So I've had 3 attempts at that. There was the one up at the Meadows, up at Doerig a few years ago, and then there was the one up at Rapunyip. Both of those I missed by one day, and then I also did a trip up the Strzelecki track in South Australia and should have seen them there but didn't. So that's become a bit of a bird, one of the birds that's a bogey bird that I'd like to see. Another favourite bird, I guess, would be a painted snipe too. That's another bird that I haven't seen. It's not a bogey bird because I've never been after it, but I would like to see that for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, two beautiful species. The leather-winged kite is quite, as I understand, is quite eruptive, isn't it? Depending on the year, it can.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So if there's a mouse plague, for example, then they'll tend to follow it. And that's probably why they've followed it over the border into Victoria on several occasions.
Dear listeners and dear viewers, it's nice to have you with us. Remember that you can watch this episode on YouTube or on any of your favourite streaming platforms for podcasts. Back to the episode. The other thing I wanted to ask is, have you been birding internationally as well in your life?
I've done a bit of birding over in the UK, so in the sort of the southwest of London, just southwest, around the Richmond Park area. But I've also done all that sort of southern area of the UK as well, and I love UK birding. It's fantastic, really good.
Why is that?
And well, the English are really into their birding.
Yeah.
So it's well supported, and they take it seriously. For example, on UK TV during spring, there's a TV show totally dedicated to birds called Spring Watch.
Yeah.
And it's like half an hour every day. So, and they set up webcams and all over the place. So you get to see all sorts of different types of birds, and yeah, great place to bird.
Yeah, for excellent. Sure. And I also suppose that the population density over there is just so much greater than it is here, that you're necessarily going to run into more birders when you're out and about.
Yeah, I think it's fairly sort of, what's the word for it, ubiquitous over there. In other words, there'd be somebody in every family over there that would be a birder, no doubt. I did a lot of birding around Richmond Park, in fact, and the diversity of birds in there is just amazing.
Yeah,
really
yeah,
amazing.
For sure.
In a slightly different way to it here, because we have a lot of songbirds in Australia, and especially in first light in the morning, you can go to one of your local reserves, and the amount of bird calls and singing that's going on is just phenomenal here in this country. Maybe not so much in places like Europe and the UK. But,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and me as a European, the thing that really impresses me is how loud the sulphur-crested cockatoos can get. It's amazing how loud they can get. I wonder how many decibels. It must be one of the loudest birds.
That's right.
Amazing.
They are unbelievable. Raucous creatures.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it, David. I want to thank you for coming on, and it's been a pleasure. And I hope that that we can catch up in the field sometime for sure. That'd be good. Because now, doing this podcast, I'm kind of realizing that the birding community, is actually quite small if you come to think of it. The Aussie birding community. So yeah.
Yes. Oh, thank you for having me on.
Okay, thank you. See you soon.
See you soon. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Birding Today podcast. New episodes are released every Friday, and if you'd like to get in touch, just write an email to birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.